the world, and welcome to this OML webinar 2021 titled Digital Transformation in Legal Metrology. My name is Florian Thiel. I'm head of PTB's Department of Metrological Information Technology and convener of Working Group 7 software of WELMEC, the European Corporation in Legal Metrology. The webinar was initially planned as a two-day event at the PTB in Germany in May 2020, but had to be postponed due to the pandemic. Today, it is my pleasure to guide you through this webinar. As a start, let me motivate this webinar. Digital technologies have matured significantly over the past 10 years, namely embedded systems, the Internet of Things, cloud computing, blockchain, and big data concepts. These have facilitated completely new technology fields and data-driven markets, such as the industrial internet, Industry 4.0, machine learning, and artificial intelligence-based smart services provided by digital platforms. These technology and data-driven possibilities, together with concepts for digital platforms, could be exploited for the benefit of all stakeholders in legal metrology, namely to overcome barriers to innovation set up by regulations, better coordinate legal processes, reduce development costs, and reduce the time to market of new products. Therefore, we feel that it is helpful for all stakeholders in legal metrology to come together on a regular basis to discuss the challenges and opportunities that digital transformation brings. Our webinar aims at exploring contemporary challenges, opportunities, and solutions regarding digital transformation in legal metrology. This webinar is especially intended to provide a platform for the exchange of strategies, concepts, and first steps towards realizations. To this end, the webinar will bring together experts from different technical disciplines, as well as representatives from industry, science, testing authorities, notified bodies, and regulatory bodies. By compiling the programme, we aimed at covering the strategic and regulative point of view, as well as applications and specific technologies required to deal with the process of digital transformation. Most valuable for a vivid webinar is the interaction with the audience. So after the presentations, there will be a question and answer session where we ask questions you, the audience, have posted via the chat functions of the WebEx tool to me and my colleague Martin Nischwitz. You, the audience, could surely post questions during all the presentations. The slides of the webinar and the recording of it will be provided after the event on the OML website. At the end, I just have one housekeeping rule. For the convenience of the presenter, I kindly ask the other presenters and the participants to mute your microphone and switch off your camera. So now it is time to begin with the presentations and the introduction of the talks and the speakers. Please switch off your microphones and turn off your cameras. May I kindly ask to upload the first presentation while I introduce the first speaker. The keynote lecture will be given by Professor Roman Schwarz. Roman Schwarz is well known in the worldwide community of legal metrology. He is president of the International Committee of Legal Metrology, which is the functional decision-making body of the OML. His talk is about digital transformation of metrology, the view of the BEPM OML Joint Task Group. Roman Schwarz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, whatever fits to your time zone. As the president of the CIML, the International Committee of Legal Metrology, it is my great pleasure to open this OML PTB webinar with a presentation about digital transformation in, yes, I would say metrology in general and legal metrology in particular, the view of the BIPM OML Joint Task Group. Before I start, let me thank all colleagues who made this OML PTP webinar possible, where I would like to especially mention my PTP colleague and chairman of the WMAC Working Group 7 on Software, Dr. Florian Thiel, and all speakers, who are Dr. Sergei Golubev from the Russian Federation, Professor Jan Nordholz from the PTP Germany, and Dr. Wilson Melo from Brazil. I would also like to thank the BML team in Paris, and last but not least, you, the participants. I'm glad that we have about 200 participants showing interest in this webinar and the topic digital transformation in legal metrology. So, let me switch. Oh, no, I'm trying to show the next slide. Yep, now it works. Sorry for the short break. I'd like to start with a glance at the new website of the BIPM. By the way, I find the new design very attractive. My congratulations. Here, the BIPM is introduced as the international organization established by the MITA Convention, through which member states act together on matters related to measurement science and measurement standards, and the home of the International System of Units, the SI, and the International Reference Timescale, the UTC. Whereas the OML is the international organization dealing with legal metrology, where its mission is to enable economies to put in place effective legal metrology infrastructures that are mutually compatible and internationally recognized for all areas for which governments take responsibility, such as those which facilitate trade, establish mutual confidence, and harmonize the level of consumer protection worldwide. Last year, in October 2020, a new BIPM OML Joint Task Group has been established, after approval by the respective international committees, namely the International Committee for Weights and Measures, the CIPM, and the International Committee for Legal Metrology, the CIML. The Joint Task Group is made up of 6 members, including the CIPM and CML presidents and the BIPM and BML directors. The major aims of the Joint Task Group are to foster enhanced cooperation between the BIPM and OML in order to facilitate both organizations in serving their member states better, to speak with one single voice for metrology, and the major strategic objective of the Joint Task Group is to develop and promote a common vision and a common holistic concept of metrology as a key element for the active promotion of the quality infrastructure concept. The action plan includes, but is not limited to, the joint promotion and support of the digital transformation of metrology. This slide shows how metrological activities are always related with other quality infrastructure activities, with the consequence that the digital transformation of metrology requires a holistic approach of all parties involved in the quality infrastructure of a country or economy. The 3 major pillars of the quality infrastructure are metrology, standardization, and accreditation, with 6 international organizations having responsibility for the worldwide harmonization. The BIPM and the OML for metrology, ISO and IEC for standardization, and ILAC and IRF for accreditation. Below the metrology institutes and the standardization and accreditation bodies, there are laboratories and bodies being responsible for calibration, testing, certification, and inspection. In addition, according to the definition of INET-QI, the International Network on Quality Infrastructure, QI activities also include conformity assessment and market surveillance. The yellow arrows show the quality infrastructure activities in which the OML is primarily involved. Concerning the digital transformation of metrology, it is the view of the BRPM OML Joint Task Group that the digital transformation of scientific, industrial, and legal metrology activities should be a holistic process which includes all relevant aspects and activities from the beginning, which is calibration, recalibration, testing, retesting, certification and recertification, verification and re-verification or inspection, market surveillance, accreditation, and also standardization. Where this requires good cooperation of all stakeholders, that means manufacturers and of course manufacturers associations, national or regional regulatory and supervising bodies, international organizations in the field of quality infrastructure, notably the BRPM, the OML, ISO IEC, ILAC IIF, and maybe others. A real challenge, especially for legal metrology, is the digital transformation of various processes during the life cycle of a product. The life cycle of a product, the measuring instrument, begins with the manufacturer, who is responsible for the product design and the production line, where a third party takes care of the conformity assessment steps, comprising type examination and the surveillance of the quality system for the production. These two steps, accompanied by market surveillance activities, guarantee that the products which are placed on the market are in conformity to the approved and certified type. These activities are often designated as pre-market activities. Once the customer has bought the product and has put it into use, he will be responsible for the proper installation and use, and has to take care that a verification body performs the verification and the regular re-verification. These activities are often designated as post-market activities. In addition, the instrument usually also requires regular maintenance, eventually repair, and also software updates. For the sake of completeness, I would like to mention that in some countries and regions, market surveillance is considered as a post-market activity. Looking at the various processes during the life cycle of a product, it becomes obvious that the digital transformation of these processes can only be successful and effective if it is based on the exchange of fair and traceable digital data, where fair and plus T means findable data, accessible data, interoperable data, operable data, reusable data, and data which are traceable to the SI. Here, I would like to present a more detailed view on how a fully digitalized life cycle of a networked instrument could look like in the future. The picture here focuses on the various legal metrology activities, but it can equally be applied to other metrological activities such as calibration. The blue circle shall represent the Internet of Things, where all relevant data are stored in a secure cloud. The box in the middle shall represent the smart measuring instrument and its digital representation. I shall provide a more detailed explanation of the concept of a digital representation on the next slide, but would like to mention here already that it is understood as a representation of the physical instrument, which contains not all, but the relevant data of an individual instrument throughout its lifetime. The life cycle starts again with the manufacturer, who is responsible for the production of the measuring instrument, its remote control and remote maintenance. as well as the continuous analysis of incoming data. The smart measuring instrument is marked electronically, for example with a digital plate, which forms part of the data stored in the digital representation. The certification body or other responsible authority takes care of either peer assessment or accreditation of the manufacturer, the supervision of the manufacturer's quality system for the production, the conformity assessment of a new type of measuring instrument, which could be done remotely in the future, where the respective certificate and of course test report, etc., can be stored electronically, for example by the digital certificate of conformity, which is again stored in the digital representation. Provided that the test laboratory has successfully performed a test, maybe a remote test, and issued an electronic or digital test report to be used by the certification body. The Market Surveillance Authority will perform a remote supervision and ensure remotely conformity to type. The initial verification and periodic re-verifications, as well as sampling inspections and other activities of the inspection bodies and verification authorities will also be done remotely, where an electronic or digital mark is stored in the digital representation of the instrument. We can expect that in the future, certainly after a transition period, all the information in the red boxes, that means the software information stored in the digital representation, will completely replace the traditional way of hardware marking of verified instruments. Of course, the customer is responsible for the proper use according to the specifications of the manufacturer and the legal requirements. And last but not least, the accreditation bodies are responsible for the accreditations of the manufacturers and other stakeholders involved, for example, the certification body and test laboratories. To be very clear, this is a vision and not yet reality. But many colleagues are working hard to make this vision become reality in the not so distant future, as will hopefully be demonstrated in the course of today's OML webinar. Again, I would like to repeat that in my point of view and in the viewpoint of the Joint Task OML BIPM Joint Task Group, the digital transformation of legal metrology processes, and I would add of all metrology processes, can only be successful and effective if it is based on the exchange of fair, SI-based digital data, where the emphasis is on the I, that means the interoperability of data and processes. As announced already, here are some more details about the concept of a digital representation in metrology processes. For legal metrology purposes, digital representations contain all relevant information that the responsible bodies need to perform the conformity assessment, the verification, the market surveillance in a machine-readable way. Digital representations also know the relevant standards and regulations and provide machine-readable information about it. They also contain all relevant information for customers to gain trust and confidence in the products and quality measures. They provide machine-readable interfaces for users and manufacturers to enable smart quality assurance, and combine machine-readable documents and certificates, hence enable automation of digital quality infrastructure processes. Very importantly, they are secured and validated to provide access to information only to eligible parties, for example by use of the blockchain technology, which will be explained in today's last presentation given by our Brazilian colleague Dr. Wilson Melo. Besides the European Metrology Cloud, which will be explained by Professor Jan Nordholz in the next but one presentation, the Digital Certificate of Conformity in Metrology, abbreviated DCOCM, is a good example of where the digital transformation process has already started. It is a PTB project that is carried out in cooperation with the weighing industry. The idea is that the DCOCM forms part of the digital representation of a measuring instrument under legal control, for example, a weighing instrument, where it contains the type evaluation certificates, certificates of supervised manufacturers, quality systems for the production, and other relevant documents, and provides the legally prescribed information as machine-readable data, for example, a digital data plate, a digital test report, or a digital verification mark, etc., to enable stakeholders to perform all legally prescribed actions. This requires, as I said already, a holistic approach to address the needs of all stakeholders involved during the life cycle of an instrument. Again, all this is intended to be realized using FAIR plus T, that means traceable digital data based on the SI. At the end of my talk, I would like to present the view of the BRPM OML Joint Task Group on a possible joint statement of intent regarding digital transformation of metrology as part of the international quality infrastructure. The Joint Task Group recognizes the importance of the international system of units, the SI, which underpins all measurements in industry, trade, legal metrology, and science. It recognizes the necessity for a digital transformation of industrial, legal, and scientific metrology activities and processes in close cooperation with all stakeholders in the field of quality infrastructure. It supports that digital representations of physical devices should rely on robust, unambiguous, and machine-actionable data, which are based on the SI and on FAIR principles to facilitate efficient processes in industry, economy, society, modern research, and development globally. It supports a respective joint statement of intent to be elaborated and signed by all stakeholders in the field of quality infrastructure, and invites the representatives of other organizations to join this initiative towards a digital quality infrastructure framework based on the SI and FAIR principles. Concerning the timeline, it is planned to prepare a final draft document by mid-July this year, so that it can be signed by the participating international organizations in the course of this year, where the CRPM and the CML will have their meetings in October 2021. With this, I thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, I'm certainly ready to take and answer them in the Q&A session. Thank you.
So thank you to Roman Schwarz for the update on the view of the BPM OML Joint Task Group and the possible implications of digital transformation for the future of whole metrology. So we see you again in the question and answer session. Don't forget to post questions to Martin Nischwitz. And we go forward to the second talk. Again, please switch off your microphones and turn off your cameras. And may I kindly ask to upload the next presentation while I introduce the speaker?
Yes.
Well, the next talk is given by Dr. Sergei Golubev. Sergei Golubev is deputy head of the Russian Federal Agency on Technical Regulation and Metrology, the Rosstandart. He's vice president of the Euro-Asian Cooperation of National Metrological Institutions, COMET, and member of the Presidential Council of the International Committee of Legal Metrology. His talk covers the topic law on metrology, barrier or driver for digital transformation in metrology. So Sergei, we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Florian. Does my screen appear correctly now?
Yes, it's visible.
Very good. So, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me to present here my talk about our project of digital transformation for legal metrology inside Russian Federation. It's especially interesting that a lot of points in my talk will correlate with the previous talk of the Professor Roman Schwartz, and I hope that I will have a chance to show you some practical realizations on the principles which described in the previous talk. So, as it already said, my name is Sergei Golubev, and my field of responsibility in federal agency is general metrology, and what is especially important for our seminar, the digital transformation of it. When I planned to present this talk 1 year ago, I wanted to tell you about our project of digital transformation for legal metrology. The progress of this project. But pandemic made me a lucky speaker. At the end of the 2020 year, we had successfully completed our 3-year work. So now I can speak and present you the practical results of our project with some outcomes. So I hope to tell you about our concept, main steps, some pitfalls we have met with, show you some key information about develop a digital platform, and we'll make some conclusions about it. When we are talking about the digital transformation in metrology, and in particular in legal metrology, I think that we can face different points of view. What is it? What should be the result of the digital transformation, and who will be interested in the final product? For example, I think that now none of us will be surprised by opportunity to exchange a passport or driver license, get visa and any other state service via the internet. This is possible because of the digital infrastructure of the modern society. And I think that now, as a practical result of the digital transformation in metrology, we should have the similar infrastructure available for all participants of the metrology system. Of course, I speak for Russian Federation, where I'm responsible for this question. Thus, for us, the goal of the digital transformation at this step for legal metrology is to develop an infrastructure where all users or participants can do their legal metrology tasks. The technical component, such an infrastructure, is a digital platform that operates with data about standards, measurement instruments, reference materials, and other technical objects in legal metrology. The legal component is to ensure the legal significance of all actions performed on the digital platform. I think that the very important keynote here is that for practical using, all data on a digital platform must be coherent. For example, data about measurement instrument needs data about all instruments for its calibration to exist on a platform and automatically connect here. To achieve mentioned goal, it is necessary to solve 3 tasks. The first is the development of the technical platform, the main technical component of the planned infrastructure. The second is the motivation of the participants of the metrology system or users of the legal metrology to work in the created infrastructure. And here we can make a reference to the name of my report. The law of metrology inside Russian Federation is a great driver to motivate users to work in the digital infrastructure. In the absence of the legislative driver, the transition of users to a digital platform can take several years or even a decade, but the legislation allows for such a transition in the shortest possible time. The third is to ensure the legal significance of the data stored in the digital platform. Without this, the creation of such an infrastructure and platform will only create a new inconvenience for users. I think many of us have had to deal with a situation where the so-called digitalization generates only a duplication of previously done actions in the digital environment. Of course, it's a bad practice, and I do not agitate you for this. Then there are simple tasks. It was necessary to select the tasks of legal metrology that should be transferred to the digital infrastructure. We had selected 19 tasks, the main of which you can see on the screen. A note for understanding needs to be made here. In the Russian Federation, legal metrology is mainly based on the verification procedure of measurement instruments. Now we have this procedure in many ways close to the traditional understanding of calibration. Its results usually is not only a conclusion about the suitability or unsuitability of measurement instrument, but also its metrological characteristics such as error, instead of uncertainty, and some others. Verification is the most widespread task in the field of legal metrology in Russian Federation. By different estimations, there are about 50 to 60 million verifications are carried out inside the country per year. The task of storing and processing such a large data is very difficult. However, we made this decision through the information on the verification of measurement instrument. We received data about all measurement instruments used in the field of legal metrology inside the Russian Federation. Let me estimate the capacity of the platform we have developed. The platform should process about 500 verifications from 2,000 verification authorities per minute. It means that the peak performance should be able to process several thousand verifications per minute. But I do not want to go deep in the technical details. And the important keynote which I want to mention here is that the legal significance of the data on the platform requires, first of all, digital signatures. After all, this data is often used, for example, by cards. In the case of verifications, this is the signature of the verification authority. Also, the information must be protected from unauthorized changes, including some hacker attacks and so on. Developing a digital infrastructure consists of two parallel threads in our case. The first one is working with the legislation that ensures the recognition of the digital platform, and the second one is the development of the digital platform itself. In our case, the legislation is, first of all, the national law on metrology, as well as a number of other legislative and technical acts. A technical platform is software product and the server capacities. The key question for the development process is the question, who will do it? A specialized outsourcing company or internal resources? For national metrology body, it's usually the National Metrology Institute. Initially, the choice was made in favor of an outsourcing company in our case. The obvious advantage of this solution is the higher professional competence of the specialists in this organization. Also, from the first view, the cost of this development looks lower. However, our practice has shown that the specifics of the metrology are so great that the professional organization has not been able to deal with it for 2 years. In addition, the cost of external development, although initially seemed smaller, in practice began to grow. For example, some minor changes in legislation require changes on the platform. Of course, it costs some extra money for us. Therefore, after about a year and a half of the work with the outsourcing company, we decided to transfer the development of our platform to one of the Russian metrology institutes. The important note here is that despite the fact that these two processes developing in parallel, they are strongly independent from them. Therefore, it is necessary to coordinate them by the project team. A very important point on which I want to elaborate separately. The first decision we needed to make was about the order of execution of these two threads. A simpler option was to first develop a technical platform and then prepare changes to the legislation. However, in this case, the period of digital transformation would greatly increase. In addition, when developing changes to legislation, many issues were found in practice, were recommended by our colleagues, and they reflected in the technical platform. So we tried to move these two streams in parallel, and now I think that it was most reasonable decision. The second decision concerned changes to the legislation. To make a softer transition period to the digital infrastructure, it is easier at the first stage to allow work for users to work both in the digital infrastructure and in the old way with paper certificates and so on. But in this case, after some time, it will be necessary to re-adopt changes to the law that will oblige users to work on a digital platform. However, in this case, the information collected through the technical platform will not be fully up to date. Therefore, the regulator decided to make it mandatory for participants to switch to the digital platform immediately after the legislation will take an effect. This decision was reflected in the national law on metrology and, in my opinion, served as a driver for the digital transformation in my case. Important note is that sometimes an easier in realization way can lead the transformation project to great enlarging of the spending time of the time which we need to do it. This slide shows an approximate time scale of coordination of the technical platform development and the movements in the legislation. As you can see, the technical platform development by the outsourcing company was started a little bit earlier. However, during the testing and implementation of the received product, the federal agency and the several organizations revealed the problems that I mentioned above. In 2019, the technical platform was developed and successfully implemented in the federal agency. A little bit later, the developed platform was also integrated in all participants and stakeholders, companies, organizations, and so on. The cycle of developing legislation, as the practice shows, takes not less than 3 years. In our case, it was the law which suggested to Parliament by the federal government. The first step, it is working out with the professional community. The second step is approval with the federal bodies, authorities, and the government. And the third step is the official one. The draft is officially sent to Parliament for adoption and subsequent signature by the President of Russian Federation. The period for taking effects of new provisions was 270 days. And we used this time, first of all, for development of the lower level government and ministries acts. Also, it was the last call for the stakeholders to join to the technical platform. The changed law came into power on the September the 24th of the 2020 year. From that moment, in connection with our decision, as I mentioned above, all participants in the system of ensuring of uniformity of measurement in legal metrology were required to work on a digital infrastructure. Paper certificates and other confirmations of metrological services which were made not inside the digital infrastructure were not enough from this moment. And we have started to collect the data about the technical legal metrology infrastructure, the measurement instruments, verification instruments, and so on. Returning to the technical platform, it should be noted that with its introduction into practice at the beginning of the 20th year, work on its improvements was not stopped. They continue in future, and I think it's a permanent process. If you do not trust me, or if you are really interested in my talk, then you can look at the technical platform and the mentioned address on the internet. In my report, I would not like to dive deep into the details and describe the technical platform interface in details, because it's very complex and it would take much more than 20 minutes, I think. I will point only the key points. The technical platform contains both closed and open portals. On the open portal, anyone, including you, can see any information about in the field of the legal metrology in Russia, including all applicable internal documents, including, for example, OML recommendations in Russian and English languages. For example, you can check the verification of the measurement instrument by its serial number. Authentication in a closed portal is carried out using an unified digital authentication system for citizens and organizations adopted in our country, in Russian Federation. That is, to do this, you need to get a digital signature and register with the United Operator of this system. To date, this opportunity is provided only to Russian organizations, but the system also developed only for Russian companies. By the way, because today the users of this system are exclusively Russian organizations, that the translation of the interface into English has not been carried out and is not yet planned. So it's not necessary really now. In total, the technical platform has 19 modules for the number of main tasks. Working in the system is quite convenient, I think. There are all the traditional ways of searching and selection information. I should mention that the large organizations that perform a large number of metrological tasks, they have the mechanism of packet data transmission. This can be done both through files, through special files, or with using of the application program interface of the system. It also was developed for this task. The question here is whether the system contains information about metrological tasks that completed before September the 24th of the 2020. During the preparation of the draft law, it was decided not to require from the participants of the digital infrastructure to post all information about previously performed services. Confirmation of previously performed services are accepted in the old paper format. Indeed, putting all this data into a digital platform would be a load on the enterprises and seems for them to be unreasonable. At the same time, Rosstandart, the Agency of Technical Regulation, requires from our dependent organizations, especially national metrology institutes and our dependent verification authorities, to enter all the information starting from the 2010 year. It explains why we have about 50 million verifications per year, but in total on the platform, it is more than 300 million verification datasets. The important keynote here is that the most difficult point in such a transition are the various transitional provisions and agreements. Of course, it's a critical point, I think. This slide shows a few key figures about the number of datasets processed by the technical platform. All these datasets are not just a volume, they are structured and coherent or interconnected between themselves. Of course, this approach creates a large number of technical challenges. For example, we get a lot of requests. Oh, sorry, I can send verification information because my verification instrument or reference material or guideline is not on the technical platform. We have established a support service for such participants. All requests are processed fairly quickly. It should be emphasized once again that at the implementation stage, a huge amount of work was done to digitalize all the information about the verification instruments, standards, and so on. And here it is appropriate for me to express my great gratitude to my colleagues from Metrology Institute who managed to do this in 270 days. In fact, it was probably the most resource-intensive thing to do for us. Sometimes we met a strong resistance for our changes, but we were persistent in the suggested concept. So it brings important results in terms of the data obtained through the platform. For example, it is already possible to obtain extremely important data about the traceability of various measurement instruments to national primary standards from existing datasets. And I hope that it will give a great input not only for legal metrology, but also for scientific metrology. It's explainable reason for finding this or that primary standard, for example. Also, this data is very important for metrological surveillance. Colleagues see measurement instruments whose verification period has expired and no new verifications have been registered for this measurement instrument. They can apply targeted response measures. For accreditation surveillance, data about organizations performing a suspiciously large number of metrological tasks is also important. They can also focus on such cases and response for them. I think about the participants of the digital infrastructure. I have already said enough earlier, so I want just to fix them. The measurement instrument users are not only companies and authorities, but also citizens. This is a very important point because the key objective of the law on metrology in Russian Federation are, among other things, the protection of the citizens. Now, with the help of the mobile application, which is available in App Store or Google Store or somewhere else, if desired, people can, for example, check the verification of the scale at the supermarket, fuel dispenser at the gas station, or the water meter in the apartment. Therefore, this work the work which we have done has an important social effect, I think. Now we are going to the key benefits of the digital infrastructure in legal metrology. For the national metrology body, this is, of course, the most actual data about the technical means used in the field of technical instruments used in the field of legal metrology. When the array of these data will be more or less complete, you should take into account my remark about the data before 2020. The practical significance of these data, I believe, will be difficult to overestimate. All traceability schemes of measurement instruments and verification tools will also be formed by the platform. Finally, an environment for risk-oriented metrological surveillance is one of the tasks of the raw standard, can help in this field. Using the digital infrastructure will make their work easier in principle. For verification authorities, first of all, this is an opportunity to work with the results in real time. Accordingly, this allows them to increase their customer focus. The problem of forged or fake documents in metrology is also a problem. Many authorities are regularly need to prove the innocence of these fake decisions. For them, this problem is no longer disturbing. Finally, the third important one, often due to human mistakes, the result of the work have to be concealed. For the authorities, this is a revocation of their certificates and some extra costs for correction of this mistake. Now the system either does not allow such errors or allow you to detect them earlier. For manufacturers and users, most of the mentioned points are also useful. In addition, it is an automated tracking of verification periods. Also, I know that some of them are going to analyze the market and find the most appropriate verification authority. These are already implemented features, but I think that many of you know all the benefits of the digital transformation as well as I do. So let me come to the conclusions. It shows on the screen and I can read it. Changing the legislation can be a motivator or driver for the transformation of the professional community in the shortest possible time. The digital infrastructure for legal metrology can be created and implemented in 3 or 4 years period. The infrastructure will bring great economic benefits for its consequent participants. So, at the very last of my talk, I want to say many thanks for my colleagues from the Russian Metrology Institutes. Of course, they made a great impact to this work, and it would not be possible without their support. Thank you very much for your attention again.
So thank you, Sergey, for discussing the question of how lawmaking could drive digital transformation in legal metrology, and for explaining an impressive example for a platform and infrastructure to support and to make digital transformation in legal metrology a reality. Well, we see you again in the question and answer session, and we switch over to the third talk. Please switch off your microphone and turn off your camera. And may I kindly ask again to upload the next presentation while I introduce the next speaker. The next talk will be given by Professor Jan Nordholz. Jan Nordholz is Professor of Secure and Trustworthy Network Attached System Architectures. This is a joint professorship at PTB, the National Metrology Institute of Germany, and the Technische University of Berlin. It is also associated with the Einstein Center Digital Future in Berlin. His talk is about a PTB initiative, which has started in 2018, the European Metrology Cloud, establishing the European Metrology Network. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can clearly hear me and see my presentation. Welcome everybody across the world to our presentation on the European Metrology Cloud. So after these two great talks before, I think I can keep the introduction of the topic pretty short. So we're here about digital transformation in legal metrology, and we've also seen how big the market and how big the activity in legal metrology is in the market. So these numbers for Germany are a little older. They're from 2014, as you see, but we're also in the 7-digit figures of verifications per year. And we at PTB, we're also seeing this need to create a digital platform for doing this legal metrology, not in the old-fashioned paper way, but instead doing the process digital in order to speed things up, in order to get more easier, coherent data sets and a coherent view of the overall system, have digital signatures, make everything verifiable, even by regular users in the supermarket. So we also set out to create such a platform, as Dr. Golubov just explained for the Russian case. Our approach is a little bit different, and the key aspect for us was that we need a distributed system, because we are intending here to create a prototype that is that is possible to span across all of Europe due to Europe's harmonization in legal metrology laws. So our view is not to have a centralized system where everybody's interacting with and uploading certificates, but instead we're going for a system where each stakeholder in the system, so individual verification authorities in one of the partner countries, national metrology institutes, manufacturers, and users, that is companies having the equipment in their, active in their, I don't know, supermarket or wherever, that all these get their own so-called node, so one part of this metrology cloud, and these nodes are then all linked together into a big mesh network that basically sits on top of the regular internet. And these nodes then share data with each other and can engage with each other to run through legal metrology processes. And the key aspect here also is, as we have no central authority, there's also no central storage for keeping the data. Instead, we put very much emphasis on that every stakeholder keeps all the data that is relevant for legal metrology, so all the metadata information for the measuring equipment that a manufacturer produces, for example, or the data where a particular measuring instrument is currently situated in the field so that that verification authorities can find it. All those data items are kept by the particular stakeholder who provides this piece of data and is kept only on that node. It is never backupped, it is never replicated, so we are not creating any kind of central honeypot, any central location that could be targeted by an attacker to get out all the data that exists in legal metrology. As you can imagine, if we are also including conformity assessment procedures here, there are probably very sensitive documents that are being shared across this European Metrology Cloud network that we envision. And so we are going to the utmost security concepts, encryption anyway, but also in this distributed storage sense, so that we're not creating a central store for attackers to try to get into. So what do we need? Of course, we need a secure authentication in the system so that all the partners can log into the system with their respective rights and access control mechanisms in place to access whatever documents they shall only be allowed to have access to. We need to have immutable logging, and in this distributed network sense where all these peer-to-peer like nodes are interacting with each other, the only way to create immutable logging is to create a shared blockchain. So we will have this distributed ledger technology as the only possible technology to use in this case to create an immutable logging that is always appended to when a new legal metrology process completes or a new step inside a legal metrology process completes and the process is advanced to the next stage. This will all be recorded in the central blockchain with a quite complicated cryptographic scheme so that process progress is only readable by those participants involved, and they can again then prove to, should it come to court, to court whether to define or to explain whether something really happened or not. You can review this immutable central log. With this data harmonization basically for free, because we're operating on data sets where the individual items of a data set are shared across different participants in the network, but still together this shared database forms one consistent set of the EU legal metrology data set. And as we said, we have this minimal data approach. So every stakeholder only shares those items of data that he needs to fulfill a particular documentation requirement for a current legal metrology process, for example, conformity assessment. And after the process completes, he is even allowed to take the documents out of the system again, because then the final certificate will be in the system, and this will be enough to prove that the process has really taken place and the conformity was assessed. Okay. Okay. So I think I already said most of this, and I don't want to run out of time because we're already a little late. Yeah, so maybe I'll share a little bit more about these processes. So if you are doing digital processes on a blockchain, then the concept that is usually used here, and that is also used in other blockchain using projects, is the so-called smart contract. A smart contract is basically the digitalization of a process scheme, of like a flowchart diagram that specifies which stakeholder in the process at which point in time has the possibility to perform what action, and that will then drive the process to the next state or maybe revert back to a previous state in case documentation wasn't enough to fulfill the requirements as mandated by law, and so on. So these smart contracts then go together with this blockchain to create this immutable log of actions that were performed in terms of legal metrology. We have a federated public key infrastructure concept. Again, as this is all a distributed system, we are not creating a centralized PKI where we have one single institute or federal agency that is giving out certificates. Instead, we are linking together these nodes, and every stakeholder creates his own subtree of public key infrastructure, so his own identity subtree that describes users in the system, and then these are linked together to form like this global user and role database, and where then stakeholders can assign access control based on institution a particular member belongs to. We're also already thinking ahead, so we're looking at this, or we were looking at this initially from a legal metrology perspective, but of course we're already seeing extensibility towards related fields, for example, industrial metrology. I'll get to this again at the end. And then there's also one other big concept to consider if we're working on legal metrology in Europe. In Europe, as you probably know, we currently have this Gaia-X cloud standardization initiative, where there's a big standardization coming up about how cloud services, cloud providers can specify what they provide, and then cloud services that can run on a particular cloud provider can specify what kind of service it is, what kind of data it imports, what kind of data it exports, the security requirements, and so on. So Gaia-X is a very generic cloud description language, and it also includes like broker service for finding particular services that do a certain thing you want. So it only makes sense if we're creating here this distributed metrology node or metrology cloud concept to also think about how we can make it compatible with Gaia-X. Now, Gaia-X is a standard that is only being drafted at the moment. There are only very few high-level policy documents out. So this is something that is in progress as we are further working on this metrology cloud. So we are busy working to keep the both projects in line and ensure that the metrology cloud is later reusable as a Gaia-X component, and that the data can then be used, for example, for manufacturers who would like to use other Gaia-X compatible cloud service, and they would like to exchange data back and forth between the legal metrology field and the other cloud services they use. So I'll keep it short on our partner list. So we already have our node installed at PTB. We have a metrology cloud node installed at the Czech Metrology Institute at CMI. We're also partnering with Sartorius, a manufacturer here in Germany, who's we've also test installed and known we are testing a little bit of technology. We're in talks with the German market surveillance authorities because the verification, the re-verification, request for re-verification can also already be put digitally. So we're working with integrating this into our European metrology concept. Further on the right-hand side, you can also see that the PTB is currently also working on standardizing the digital calibration certificate. And although this is not legal metrology, we've already made a few steps towards integrating the storage of DCCs inside the metrology cloud. You also see this in the practical presentation. And with this, I will switch over and share a video with you. This video will show you the current minimal user interface of the metrology cloud. This is a minimal user interface. We're a team of basically researchers, and we're doing all this to build a research prototype that is then, well, of course, in the end, it should go into industry and into practice. But right now, this is a technology demonstration to get all the market players on board, create trust with the manufacturers, with the market surveillance authorities, and so on. So we're no UI designers, so you'll see what I mean. Don't worry if the video quality is not great on WebEx. We'll share all the material with you after this webinar ends, so you can rewatch the video later if you want. So we'll start briefly with the login procedure. The login procedure is not particularly interesting. So right now you can log in using a password or log in using a public key scheme. We're currently partnering with a small company here in Berlin to develop a USB authentication stick where like the cryptographic keys never leave the stick, right? So a secure authentication token. Right now, this is not yet integrated, so we can do the public key challenge right here in the browser. So you upload the keys inside the browser, and the browser does the cryptographic key handshake. Right after that, Login will work with these authentication dongles and will probably support different of those. Once you're in the system, so you see, right, very minimal user interface. The first thing you see here, this is our currently what you would call the digital representation. And if you remember the talk by Professor Schwartz, right, the two before me, this is not including any physical modeling of the measuring instrument. So this is the pure administrative shell of a digital, of a measuring instrument, right? So you see here components like when was the last calibration, when was the last verification, who is the owner, right? So very minimal, right? But this shall later be expanded to give you a full consistent view of a measuring instrument, including maybe a picture, a link to the manuals, a link to the digital verification marking, and so on and so forth. And also, depending on the access rights you have on the device, is it your device? Are you using it? Are you the manufacturer of the device? And so on. Gives you control over starting several processes from this administrative shell here, right? So what we're going to show you is the process for rolling out a software update to a class of measuring instruments. And this process starts at the node of the manufacturer. Quick side note, the image on the bottom right is our embedded measuring device. So we actually have this demonstrator also built like as a physical demonstrator at PTB, and we have a little embedded demo measuring device. You can see the display here. They will come in later when you see actually that the version is updated live. So the manufacturer now starts the software update, chooses for which device series he wants to update the software. Now, in a real system, he would have to upload the actual new firmware software, the firmware, describe what changes were made, add documentation, and so on and so on. He would put all these documents and data files onto his node and start this digital process, which is happening right now in the background, like add it to this immutable log and issue that he would like the conformity of the software update to be assessed. And with this action, this will now be logged into the central, this distributed Metrology Cloud logging system, and the process will make one step and be pushed on to the responsible Institute for Conformity Assessment. In our case, they will go over to the NMI, to the Conformity Assessment Lab inside PTB. So in the next step, the node on the PTB will be informed of a new digital legal metrology process coming in. We can review here the list of processes and see that there's a software update process where a manufacturer has asked for a software update to be conformity assessed. And on the PTB node, now this process can be opened, the data files could be taken out, the conformity assessment would go on as usual. And at the end, the PTB would then assess like conformity passed. Of course, it could also be that the assessment fails, then maybe the step goes back to the manufacturer, has to add or change a few documents, and the process comes back to the PTB. For now, we assume that this process has now been properly performed, conformity has been assessed. So again, PTB creates a digital signature on the digital process, and it goes on to the next step. In this case, we assume that for the conformity assessment to fully complete, also the market surveillance authorities need to do an ensemble test, so get a few test devices, make sure that the software update is indeed working properly, that the update completes, that the measuring instrument is still performing as intended. So we have the market surveillance authorities in action now as well. They perform this ensemble test, and at the end they also confirm that, okay, test passed, the new software update can be rolled out. And after this step has been completed, if we again look on the list of processes in the system, in this case, it might take a few seconds for the distributed blockchain to be distributed and to roll to the next step. But once this has happened and is active in the system, you see that the status now lists that the measuring instrument users have been informed. So the part of the manufacturer getting conformity assessment on the firmware itself is now complete. Now it's the job of all the users of one of those metrology devices to actually go in and accept the update so that the update can be rolled out on their particular measuring instrument of this device series they possibly own. So we now continue with the Metrology Cloud node of one of those users. and that user has now been informed, and he can choose now one of his measuring instruments to receive this update. So he starts the software update process for a particular measuring instrument. We have to wait a few seconds to for the process to actually go live in the distributed ledger again. Yeah, takes a few seconds. So, and then you will see now the user can actually accept the update. The update is available from the manufacturer, has been conformity assessed. So he now creates a digital signature that yes, indeed, this user is now ready to accept this update on one particular instrument. Right, later you could also assume that this could be accepted in batch for a whole set of devices you have in your institute, right? And now this acceptance means two things. A, for measuring instruments that are directly attached to the internet and directly available to the Metrology Cloud, the software update will indeed actually be pushed out by the Metrology Cloud to those devices directly reachable over internet. Of course, we also support instruments that are not directly reachable over internet. There you would then do the firmware update, of course, manually. But here you can now see, I've just stopped the video again because you now see that in the bottom right in this embedded measuring instrument system, you see that there was the request update version and that now the version on the bottom has switched to proper version number. Right? This was a version number that was entered during the conformity assessment procedure. And now by accepting the update, of course, the verification marking of the measuring instrument is no longer valid. So automatically a re-verification request has been pushed out to the verification authorities. And again, so the process is coming to the node of the verification authorities. Verification authorities will probably do whatever is possible of the verification process, a part of it remotely. Maybe a verification agent will go out and actually check that the instrument is still working as intended and within error margins. And in the end, again, the verification authority will issue the digital marking again, so that when you would reopen the digital representation of the device, it will again show as properly verified with a new verification number and a new date. So after going through this process, we'll now look again at the digital representation of a device. And you see here at the bottom left, I'm sorry that it's still in German, right? It says Digitales Kalibrierzertifikat, so digital calibration certificate. And in this particular measuring instrument, we have also a DCC attached to it in two forms. One is the PDF form. So this is like the digital calibration certificate you would get in the classical non-digital way, printed, signed, stamped from PDB. This is like the human readable form. But next to this PDF form, there's also the machine readable XML form. And there's already a little bit of code and integration in Metrology Cloud to allow automatically extracting these XML files from the Metrology Cloud, for example, to include the characteristics of this measuring instrument into other processes that use this actually as a calibrating device or for doing measurements, so that the errors and for the measurements can directly be taken over and correctly reported. So this concludes our video demo. So I'm also almost out of time, so let me briefly sum up. So what are we creating? We are creating here a prototype for a single digital platform for legal metrology. For now, for the usual reasons we've now heard plenty of times, right? Significant acceleration of processes, data consistency, no discontinuities, no USB sticks or letters running through Europe. And due to the harmonized regulations we have in Europe, we see that this system will be applicable throughout Europe. And also we have our focus also on extensibility towards other use cases, thinking of industrial metrology, storing EU declaration of conformities or digital certificates of conformity in it. And then, of course, the big question, the capability with the compatibility with Gaia-X. So making sure that the cloud service we create and this big distributed database we create here will be accessible by Gaia-X services. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions later in the Q&A section.
So thank you, Jan, for this interactive presentation and the update on the newest developments on the European Metrology Cloud. We see you again in the Q&A session. So we reached the final talk And may I kindly ask to upload the next presentation while I introduce the speaker? The final talk will be given by Dr. Wilson de Sousa Melo Jr. Wilson is member of the Laboratory of Metrology in Information Technologies of the National Institute of Metrology Standardization and Industrial Quality in Metro in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He was the first who has published scientific articles on the application and advantages of blockchain and smart contracts in legal metrology. Hence, PTB invited him immediately as a guest scientist to join the experience of Inmetro and PTB in this field and to do further research on this topic. This fruitful and ongoing cooperation resulted up to now in several mutual publications regarding this important technology. So unsurprisingly, his talk is about blockchain-based applications and metrology. So Wilson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Florian. I would like just to confirm that you are hear me properly. Also, I'd like to say hi, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to take part in this event. It's really a very important event, I would say. We have remarkable speakers here, and I am honored to be part in this group. I'd like to talk with you a little about blockchain-based applications in metrology. The results are results that you obtain in research efforts in common partnership with Metro and PTB. In the next 20 minutes, I would like to talk with you a little about the elementary concepts of blockchains, explain why blockchains are so important in terms of immutable storage, workflow automation, and also because of the security properties that you can extract from a blockchain. I will describe some case studies related to applications in metrology. They are specifically distributed measure systems, blockchain-based PKI, and also field surveillance of field dispensers. At the end, I would like to present the main challenges that you have related to this research topic, and also introduce the idea of the inter-NMI blockchain network. So let's start. A little about blockchain. In a nutshell, we can say that blockchain is a mechanism to provide trust among independent parts that do not need to trust each other. So if you think blockchain in the basics, we can describe it like a network that's composed for different peers, and this network is able to store information and also to automatize workflows by using smart contracts. So basically, you have the figure of clients that are sending transactions to the blockchain. The peers in the network need to decide about how they are going to store this transaction. So they decide a consensus about the new blocks in the chain. And finally, the network propagates the new block once that each peer in the network has its own local copy. So the main aspect is that blockchain becomes an immutable append on the data structure. It has strong security properties related to the cryptographic link that is established between the blocks. And also it enables the automation of workflows by using smart contracts that is in practice software that are running over the platform. The main aspects related to the blockchain are the technologies that are involved, that are solid technology in terms of computer science, that I would say replication, cryptography, consensus, and business logic. So all this structure put together has called the attention of different players in areas like finance, industry, business, government, and you see that metrology is also an area that can take advantage of blockchains. So when you think about all this scenario, we can, of course, try to establish a link between blockchain technology and digital transformation. When I think about digital transformation, the main concept that I can describe is the idea of Industry 4.0 that can describe by its 9 pillars. And when you look after blockchain, when we study blockchain, we notice that blockchain encompasses many of these technologies. For instance, blockchain integrates different peers in a distributed cloud-based environment. The cloud is a technology in the Industry 4.0. Blockchain also stores data in a readable repository, so you are implementing support to big data applications. We also can use smart contracts to automatize and integrate systems in horizontal and vertical aspect. And also blockchain provides security properties, like I said before, so we are enhancing cybersecurity when you use blockchains. Especially in the context of the legal metrology, when we think about smart meters and blockchains, we can notice that smart meters can constitute blockchain oracles. That is an interesting aspect when we talk about to integrate Internet of Things devices and blockchains. So more specifically now, when we talk about blockchains and metrology, the first question that we think is about what are the applications that you can abstract from this relation. So in this context, you have some elementary applications that are trivial, I would say, because the first idea is to use blockchain like an immutable data storage, so you can store on it any information that you consider like critical, for instance, measurements, or could be the calibration parameters of a specific instrument, or even some document like a attestation or a certificate. But we also can think about different applications that are a little more complex and becomes especially interesting in terms of motivation when we consider the scenario that you have in legal metrology in different countries. For instance, the first idea is to use blockchain to implement the distributed measure systems, where you have some incentives, I would say, to implement the legally relevant software as smart contracts, and it can bring more security to the network and also easier the evaluation of the software. Also, you can talk about public key infrastructures, or PKI, that are tailored for smart meters. So you have an idea that's based on low cost and also can be implemented in blockchains. Other idea would be to make the surveillance of measure instruments by using the blockchain properties. Also, you notice that blockchains open a series of new business models in terms of metrology. So this is a big idea to explore, I would say. And you can see, for instance, the example that was already presented by the speech of Dr. Ian Narkles about the European Metrology Cloud project that is considering to have blockchains into its architectural reference, especially in applications related to decentralized ID administration and immutable logbook. So now I would like to present to you three cases of applications that were developed in our research efforts in the last 3 years. So the first case is related to the concept of implementing distributed measure systems using blockchains. So the basic idea comes from a previous work related to the European Metrology Cloud. That is the consensus, the idea, I would say, that you can implement part of the legally relevant measuring process into the cloud, and in our case, into the blockchain. So the basic idea is we have my measure instrument here, and my measure instrument is constituted by basic hardware elements that are able to sense physical quantities, to implement the necessary conversion from analogical to digital signals, and also to communicate to other structure. So it is a measure instrument very simple in terms of concept. Once the information is catched by the meter is able to send the information to the blockchain, indeed in raw data format. In the blockchain, we have smart contracts that are responsible to perform the measurements, or it means the smart contract is running legally relevant software. I could also have in the blockchain some smart contracts related to the non-legally relevant software. But the idea is, if you have my legally relevant software running in a more restricted platform like the smart contracts are, you have some incentives in terms of the legal metrology activities. For instance, first, you can increase the legally relevant software protection because the software is partially written in the blockchain ledger. so it also becomes immutable in terms of consistency. You can also reduce the costs related to the measure instrument legal control. For instance, when you talk about type approval, yes, I have activities in the points 1 and 2. That means I need to evaluate my measure instrument, but it's a hardware, so it's simpler to make the evaluation. And also you need to evaluate the smart contract. That is, I would say, software code inside a specific template. So it's easier to evaluate if you consider, for instance, with a complex software that could be running in a monolithic instrument. Also, when you think about the market and field surveillance, the points 3 in my figure, you have some incentives because people that are in the field that need to check the software and the instrument, they need to worry only about the correct deployment of the smart contract and also if the measure instrument is properly sealed. So I have incentives that reduce the costs related to the legal control activities, and it can be very interesting for manufacturers that want to follow this model of implementation. We published this idea in 2 papers. I put my presentation on the proper links, so later you can access these papers if you want more details about the specific case. The second case that I would like to describe you, it's related to the concept of public key infrastructure for smart meters. This idea was originally proposed by Dr. Daniel Peters from PTB, and you had the opportunity to implement this concept together in a complete environment involving blockchains. So the concept is the blockchains will store the public keys of each smart meter. That is very interesting if you compare the idea of blockchain-based PKI with a traditional PKI, because usually a traditional PKI depends on trust third party. Usually these parties ask some costs related to the issuing of the certificate and also any verification that you need. When you think about a complex ecosystem where you have different and a big number of measuring instruments, would be really expensive to have a formal digital certificate for each instrument. So if you think about blockchain, what we are proposing, we are considering that different parts that are interested in having a PKI infrastructure for their meters, they are cooperating among each other to establish a blockchain network and to store the respective public keys of each instrument. So we are able to reduce the costs related to the digital certificates and also provide a platform that is trustable for people that need to check the information that comes from the instruments. So basically, the manufacturer requests a digital certificate. In practice, he says, I have a meter, and the meter needs to have a digital certificate. I have the figure of some permissioned endorsers that are responsible to make the check, the initial verification of this instrument. And after that, since the instrument is okay, the permissioned endorsers can write in the blockchain a transaction that informs the public key related to this instrument. After that, anyone that uses the instrument is supposing that the legally relevant information that comes from the instrument is properly signed using the private key of the instrument. Any person that has access to the blockchain can verify the proper signature. It could be a measurement, it could be any information that the measure instrument is providing. So it's a very interesting idea to implement the digital certification for the measure instruments without the costs that you have usually in a traditional PKI infrastructure. We also have published this idea, and I also make available the link to our papers here. And the third case that I'd like to describe for you is a very interesting case that you have, especially when you consider the reality of developing countries. That is the case of my country in Brazil. The concept is that you have a serious problem related to fraud in fuel dispensers. It means that usually a measure instrument that was tampered it can be used to store in terms of measurements when I am making a refill in my car. So the idea is to implement the field surveillance of fuel dispensers in a 4.0 platform, I would say. So the concept is I have my vehicles, they are refilling a fuel dispenser in a specific fuel station. And when they do that, they agree about an ID of the event. So they are completing a commercial transaction. And the fuel dispenser, it is a very precise, it's supposed to be a very precise measure instrument, and it is able to send the information to the blockchain. It means it is registering the specific measure in terms of full of the event of refilling. But I can do the same with my car. I can use an embedded sensor in my vehicle. It could be even a standard sensor that is already there, and I can get information using the OBD interface. And my vehicle is able to inform the measure also to the blockchain. Of course, here I have a problem related to the precision of both instruments, because usually the meter, the sensor that I have in the vehicle is not precise, neither accurate. And I cannot say anything about its measure uncertainty. But if you recur to the law of large numbers, and I have a big number of refilling events for different vehicles, after a large number of events, I can say something about the correct behavior or not of the fuel dispenser. So that is the idea. I can compare this information, and making the proper statistical analysis is possible to discover and expose it when I have a fuel dispenser that is subject to fraud. So where is the blockchain enters here? First, the blockchain is the platform to implement this analysis in a cooperative manner. It means all the analysis of data can be done by smart contracts. I don't need a specific process independent on it. Since this analysis is made by a smart contract, we have total transparency in terms of how I am dealing with the information. And also, I have the immutable record of this analysis in this event. Also, blockchain is interesting in terms of avoiding collusion frauds. That is a very common problem that you have when you consider this scenario that involve fuel dispensers and refilling events. Because usually there are several parts that are conspiring together to try to implement the fraud. And since I have blockchain, I can create a mechanism that usually is secure against fraud, since I have observed the conditional circumstances to implement it. So we developed this prototype. We make some tests that demonstrate this idea is feasible. And we also use the concept of Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus. That is a proper type of consensus to deal with problems like collusion attacks. We also have this idea in our publication, and the link will be available for you later. And in all these concepts that I present for you, these three specific cases, we noticed that it is important to propose and to maintain an inter-NMI blockchain network. So since 2019, Inmetro and PTB are working together to specify a blockchain architecture to support applications in metrology. So the idea is to have a blockchain network that will be held by NMIs and other institutions that are interested in specific scenarios. And so far, we have 4 publications in common. The case that I presented to you is some of them. And these ideas are proposing strategies for privacy, blockchain-based PKI prototype, and also other ideas like I described before. So far, we are using the following technologies. We have Hyperledger Fabric, that is a permissioned blockchain complete platform. It's an open source platform. It's very flexible in terms of customization. Hyperledger Fabric platform runs over a virtualization layer that is used in Docker containers. You also have are working with smart contracts that you are writing in Golang, Your client applications so far are being written in Python 3. So you have the examples of this code, this prototype, they are available in GitHub, and you also have more details in our common publication, that is the link that I presented before for you about the case related to the PKI measuring instruments. What you need to consider in this analysis, that blockchain is still a young technology. And usually young technologies always include challenges. It's the same with blockchains. So when you talk about this topic, the main of them, I believe, is the question related to performance. Yes, performance is nowadays the main bottleneck when we talk about blockchains. Blockchains is not a scalable technology so far. It means that if I have a solution that is able to address 200 users or maybe 2,000 users, I would say, that is a more realistic number. I cannot expand this structure and attend 20,000 users. So far, it's not possible. So it's necessary that you think blockchain in the beginning for a small set of applications. Of course, when I say about small sets, is a relative concept of small. For instance, in the prototype that you develop related to the distributed measure systems, we consider you are able to address speed meters in a city in the size of São Paulo city in Brazil, that is something around 20 million people living there. So there are scenarios where you can delimitate the needs, the demand, and you can design properly to the blockchain. But it needs to be evaluated before and determined in terms of size, in terms of components. Besides the performance aspect, there are also several concerns about privacy-sensitive data. The concept, the philosophy behind the blockchain is based on information sharing, and sometimes you have information that are sensitive. It cannot be shared without any specific rule or any specific restriction. So in the moment, the PTB is developing important studies regarding the application of homomorphic and functional encryption that will be very important in this concept of make blockchains, I would say, a private compliant platform. We also have some problems related to the maturity of the platform. So far, the main tools related to the blockchain are in development, so they are subject to changes. They can be modified in some aspects. So you need to understand that the platform is still changing, so applications need to deal with this. In conclusions of my talk, I would like to establish the keynotes that blockchains is a technology of huge potential. Some researchers compare blockchains with the internet 20 years ago. It means the same potential that internet had 20 years ago, that you see that is concrete now is the same that some people links to the blockchain technology. Blockchain-based applications can accelerate digital transformation in metrology, especially addressing some aspects related to reliability, system integration, and also workflows automation. And of course, the concept of an inter-EDMI blockchain network can constitute an important initiative to propagate this concept. So it's a common base for developing research ideas, and you see that it has a tool of synergy among different NMIs and also other research institutes in common demands of interest. I would like to make a short acknowledgement here for the institutions that are cooperating with you in this effort. Of course, it is a teamwork so far. I'd like to say thank you to my team that helped in the efforts, in the results that I have until now, and especially to the PTB for the support of Dr. Daniel Peters and his team. So thank you everyone for the opportunity, and I return the word to Dr. Florian. Thank you.
So thank you to Wilson Melo for explaining the blockchain technology and the concept of smart contracts with several examples in legal metrology to the audience. Wilson, please keep your camera on since we now enter the Q&A session. So we have now reached the part of the webinar where the interaction with the virtual audience takes place. So I kindly ask all the speakers to switch on their cameras and to switch on their microphone. During the talks, we have collected several questions from the audience, which we now present to the speakers. First of all, I have to ask, we have to wait for Roman Schwarz and Sergei Golubev. Would you please join?
Already here.
Don't you see me and don't you hear me?
I can hear you and now I can see you. So okay. So are there any questions from one speaker to another speaker? So that seems not to be the case for now, but we have received several questions, and I will start with the talk from Roman Schwarz. There was a question: what are the current obstacles that hamper the path to transformation in legal metrology? And how and by whom could the barriers be overcome?
Well, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. About the obstacles. I think I wouldn't speak of obstacles. I wouldn't speak of, as we heard in the last presentation, of new technologies. And it's a real a complex task to develop and provide